Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
And good morning or good afternoon or whatever applies to you all. It's March 28th. And I just want to say that I've been talking off the cuff into a microphone for most of my life, and I doubt that there's any subject I have not broached. However, and those of you who've listened for a long time will know, there are two subjects that for decades I have been reluctant to discuss because I can never contain my emotions when speaking of them. It's eviscerating for me to try to communicate about them. And those topics were abortion and Israel. Lucky me. They're the two subjects, of course, impossible to avoid in these times. My guest today is a woman who knows more about Israel than I think any of us, and she is able to advocate for Israel and people like me, and she is able to teach about Israel without screaming in despair. So it is why I am so thrilled to have her here today. Ellisa Wald is a writer who, since the Hamas massacre on October 7, has dedicated her writing skills to truth-telling about Israel. I think that would be fair to say. Ellisa, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm glad.
Good morning.
I'm really glad to have you. Thank you. You know, I have to just start by saying that when October 7 happened, the most painful part for me was feeling almost immediately totally abandoned by the very people who I've stood with and marched with for my entire life. I then and now have never felt so alone as a Jew.
Yeah, I really have a lot of sympathy for that. And the reason that I was not as, it didn't take me by surprise and it didn't feel, it's certainly the most intense surge of anti-Semitism we've seen, but it's really been building for a very long time now. And, for a very long time I've been, I'm a leftist. I'm I would not give him a voting Republican. I never have, I never would. But I found that everyone was just very consumed with the anti-Semitism on the side of the aisle that they did not belong to. And my friends were very happy to fight anti-Semitism on the right and to decry it on the right. But when I pointed out that there's this, mounting anti-Semitism on the left that's just as frightening, people would not take it seriously. They would say, this isn't lethal anti-Semitism. No liberal's going to go shoot up the Tree of Life synagogue. And yet, so they were really willing to either, they didn't see it, or they were willing to rationalize it and say it's not what we need to concentrate on. But for me, I felt that, I felt intensely homeless. I felt intensely abandoned and betrayed and all those things that you just mentioned, but that started a long time ago. So one of the battles that I fought a few years ago was the Women's March was a really big deal. And it was a tremendous event. And at the time, Linda Sarsour was at the head of that. And there were 4 other women who they were the leaders, and they hammered out these unity principles. And those unity principles included every minority under the sun, everything you could think of in specific detail, but not Jews. And this was in spite of the fact that anti-Semitic crime was exploding. And it was brought to their attention many times that Jews were left out of their unity principles, and they wouldn't add them. And they would pose with Louis Farrakhan, who has said that Jews are vermin, and said that God has, God's ovens are forever, so the Jew better beware. He said all kinds of really Hitler-esque things from his pulpit, and they're embracing him. Now, they have the right to embrace whoever they want, but if they're going to lead a feminist movement, and they're going to lead a movement of vulnerable people, and they're going to stand there and say intersectionality is what matters to them, all vulnerable people, have, a place under their tent, and they will not include Jews. To me, that was very alarming, because that was a very mainstream feminist. That was probably the central feminist event that was happening.
Yeah.
And they were basically saying Jews have no protection in our circle.
Well, I mean, I needn't tell you that that's because they're schooled in this new lefty thing that is like the rage, and has been for some time on all university campuses, putting all peoples of the world into very specific boxes, and Israel and Jews, well, we didn't make the cut. We are, Israel is an imperialist, colonialist entity. Israelis are white or white adjacent. Palestinians, of course.
Even if all that were true, even if all that were true, which it is not, all of that is actually patently false. Israel is not an imperial entity. It's not a settler colonial state and so forth. But that really doesn't have bearing. But even if we were going to pretend all that is true, what bearing does that have on American Jews who are experiencing hate crimes here? Would we ever say a crime against a Chinese American didn't matter because China has 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps? Would we ever say that a hate crime against a Russian American here didn't matter because Russia's attacking Ukraine? Why would Jews be exempt from protection in America because of something that's happening 6,000 miles away by other Jews?
Why, indeed. We know the answer.
Yes, we do.
Jews are, sorry. They are the most.
Jews don't count.
Jews don't count. They are the one thing that almost the entire world can agree on is that Jews don't count. And I have always said the reason the Palestinians are the cause celeb is because they chose the right enemy, Jews.
Yeah, well, I mean, it certainly is hard to understand. Refugees are created every hour of every day in the world, and Jews are certainly refugees from all over. Like, Jews became refugees in the millions from all over the Middle East and all over Europe at the precise time that some Palestinians were displaced from the region that's never stopped fighting about it. And
can you, Ellisa? Can you back up? And when you say Jews were made refugees at the same time, so we're talking about 1947, 48.
We're talking about the same set of years.
But not just in Europe. So it wasn't just the survivors of the Holocaust.
So all over the Middle East and all over Europe, Jews are expelled. And these are the ones lucky enough not to be brutally killed alongside every branch of their family tree, right? So we know 6 million were murdered. And the ones that were expelled from all over Europe or who fled to, in order to save their own lives, they lost everything. So the question becomes, are Jews still hanging around Germany or anywhere else today, attacking civilians, raping women, kidnapping children? Of course not, and neither is any other group of refugees in human history. Somehow, the Palestinians have become the most lavishly supported refugees in human history. And 75 years later, they still have refugee status. And it is very hard to understand why a violent jihadist entity like Hamas would be an international fetish if it weren't that people hated Jews even more. That is really the only way I can understand it.
Well, it is. It is interesting that Hamas has absolutely no redeeming qualities at all. At all. They have. They use the Palestinian people they don't mind tens of thousands of Palestinians being killed because it gives them more power. They'll sacrifice all of them.
Not only do they not mind, but that's their end game.
They hide behind. But why is there not? And there's absolutely no condemnation about the fact that they took all this money that could have made the lives of the Palestinians better, and instead built the probably greatest subterranean tunnel system in the universe, which is for them, but not for the Palestinians' protection. They hide in mosques, in schools, and none of this has any impact on the constant outpouring of sympathy for them. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah. It is mind-blowing.
Okay, so
my mind is blown every single day. If people can look, I mean, you can have big problems with the Israeli government, and I do, actually. I am not a fan of Netanyahu. He can't be ousted soon enough for me. However, when you're looking at these two governments side by side, Netanyahu and Hamas, there's no question in my mind which is worse, and who's giving more to the world. Israel gives a lot to the world on every conceivable level. I don't think the Palestinians have had that chance because they've been completely consumed. Like, there's been no investment in education or infrastructure or anything of that nature. It's all been
right.
All the money has gone into terror.
Right. And the
kids
world
are
sees that
indoctrinated from a very young age.
Right. So
what's that?
Can you go back to why Israel is not a colonialist entity? Could you explain that? Because I just can't believe this is coming out of the universities. I thought their mission was education. It's insanity.
It is insanity. So obviously an imperial entity would have a mother country that they were trying to enrich, and they were trying to they were serving from a distance. So the British colonizers took over much of the world. They went to distant lands. They subjugated the native population. They exploited the resources, and they enriched Britain in the process, and contributed to those empires, which were across the ocean. Jews had nothing remotely of that kind. These were war-torn refugees. These were survivors. These were people who had nowhere to go. And in fact, it's the region to which Jews are indigenous. We are indisputably indigenous to Israel. You can't dig 6 feet in Israel without finding a Jewish artifact. And Jews have maintained a continuous presence there for more than 3,000 years. Jews have prayed facing Jerusalem for thousands of years. We've said next year in Jerusalem at the end of our Passover Seders.
That's right.
Yes.
But we have no standing.
Jerusalem's mentioned. Well, we have no standing in the public eye, but that doesn't mean we don't have standing. We certainly do have standing, So the international community made a decision to partition this land between two populations that were living there at the time. And the Jews accepted that, and the local Arabs didn't. And that's what began the 75-year conflict. The Jews had to wage the surrounding Arabs waged a genocidal battle on the brand new fledgling Jewish state the moment it was created. And by some miracle, this ragtag army of Holocaust survivors managed to fend off the attack of all the surrounding Arab countries.
Geez, you'd almost think God was on their side.
Well, I don't believe in God.
No, I don't. Isn't that funny? I don't either.
You certainly could see God's hand in it if you were religious.
But I want to say this. Speaking of God and religion, did you happen to see the Washington Post piece today by historian of ancient Christianity, Paula Fredrickson?
No, I haven't yet.
Well, if you're
It's quite early here on the West Coast.
okay, well, if you want to have your head explode just one more time, and maybe the
Okay.
left is now making Jesus into a Palestinian. They're saying he was a Palestinian.
Oh, of course. That was a big meme around Christmas time. Jesus was Palestinian.
Yeah, I think AOC put something that out like that. I mean, first of all, that is not only so ridiculous, it's impossible. Palestine as an entity didn't even exist when Jesus was born. I mean, she goes through all of this stuff. He was a Jew, for God's sakes, born in Judea.
Of course.
I mean, but
of course.
So what do we do, though? What do we do when it seems like we already know the people on the right have gone insane because they believe in whatever they need to believe in? Facts be damned. And now I'm seeing that the left is in the same thing. They're facts be damned. They're creating their own narrative and reality of Israel. And it's mind-blowing that they won't or can't be corrected. I feel like it's so futile.
Yes, I agree. So I wrote about this just 2 days ago. I said that if you're on the left, then you can see clearly that Trump supporters are deluded and indoctrinated for the most part. And, you can show them 2 pictures of a rally side by side and, Obama's can be 5 times as big as Trump's, and Trump's going to say, look, mine is bigger. And somehow these people can look at a picture and say, yes, yours was bigger. It's that and I've heard the craziest conspiracy theories by otherwise intelligent people that I'll never stop reeling. But what the left doesn't realize is that they're just as vulnerable to these disinformation campaigns and to their own confirmation bias. And it is very hard to get them to see that because it's just too fun. It's too fun to have a moral smokescreen for hating Jews.
There's an obit today of a man named Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel in economics, even though he never took an economics course. And part of his thing was showing exactly this, that people were not rational in the way they made decisions. They were not rational, even though you can't tell them that. They believe they are, but they are not.
Is that Dan Ariely?
No, it's Dan Kahneman. I don't know. He was
okay. And there was a very similar.
He was an Israeli.
That was Dan Ariely.
Dr. Kahneman.
It was called. I think it was called Irrational, right?
That I don't know.
Well, another if it is not, if you have your own Israeli Dan who wrote something of that nature, there is another well-known Dan Ariely who wrote exactly the same kind of thing.
Okay,
I'm wondering if maybe they've been conflated, but even if not,
no, I don't think so. His book, this guy's big book, was Thinking Fast and Slow, and yeah.
Okay. Well, they covered similar territory then.
Yeah.
Because Dan Ariely demonstrated how exactly why all the different kind of irrational ways that we think. You and I, we don't, the same $100, like if we're buying a house, $100 is going to feel like nothing, right? But if we lose $100 on the street, if we drop $100 bill, we're going to be like, oh no. So it's just really interesting the importance that we assign to the same exact entity can really just, context is everything. And we can have an outsized reaction or a minimal reaction or no reaction just based on the other circumstances. But really, it's the same amount of money. I mean, that's just one of many, many examples that he brought up. But yeah, really, really interesting book.
Well, when I mentioned that I felt like it's futile trying to get through to these well-intentioned former comrades of mine, you did not disagree, which upset me.
Well, I have had some success, not nearly as much or as fast as I'd like to, but I've kind of concluded that, as with the whole Trump mob mentality, every single person can only work with their own circle. There's a few people who are going to be very persuasive to big numbers of people, but most of my readers are going to have their own circle to work with. So what served me is that I've been standing on the side of the left and, posting and talking passionately about all kinds of issues that affect all kinds of vulnerable people for a really long time. So when I say, you're just not right about Israel, people who have been convinced over many years that I'm a decent human being and that I, have some brain cells in my skull will listen to me. And I think that's probably true of each one of us. We each have a sphere of influence. And it's just very important. I think people on the left get scared because cancel culture is a huge thing. We don't want to be canceled. Some of us make our living in these circles. We make our living in academic circles or artistic circles. So we rely on the goodwill of our peers. Right. And it's really tempting to stay small and stay quiet and stay safe, but we just can't. We just can't. We have to be fastidiously civil, but we have to say the truth.
You mentioned that and I mentioned you're a writer and you're writing about this, and it's is it called a substack, right? I just want people to know where they can find you. We'll mention this again.
Oh, yeah. So Substack is the place where you can sign up for free. My Substack is free. It will always be free, 100% free. I don't restrict content to anyone who can't pay. So you go to a website called Substack. You put in my name, Ellisa Wald. You look for my Substack, which is called Never Alone. And that's from the Joseph musical. And it's from the line, Children of Israel are never alone, because, as you said, every Jew I know is feeling so terribly alone, homeless, abandoned, betrayed. And I wanted to make them feel less alone. And I've noticed after defending Israel from my place on the left for a really long time now, that people would write to me privately and they would thank me and they'd say they agree with me, but they were afraid to say anything.
Wow.
And I thought, there's safety in numbers. So if we got all of us in even a virtual room, we could empower each other, we could support each other, and we could find the strength and the bravery to stand up and be counted and say, Israel's far from perfect, but it's our homeland and we love it and we care about it, and they're fighting an existential threat.
Jews, I've often said, are damned if they do and damned if they don't. A case in point I'm so sorry. I've been a living example of how climate change is making allergies worse. Forgive me.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Oh,
I never used to have allergies in the spring until now.
Well, I wish I could say that, but in the 30s, when Hitler was doing what he was doing, American Jews were looking on with great alarm, obviously, trying to get family members out. I actually, my grandfather, who was an immigrant, had wrote a number of letters to the senator, his senator, begging him to do something. Those are all now at the Holocaust Museum. Of course, nothing was done. And the Jewish community in America was really split about what should the Jews do. Should they call attention to this? Should they have a huge march in New York? And a lot of Jews said, oh my God, no, don't do that. It will only feed in to the fact that we think, we have power somehow. And on the other hand, so Jews are sometimes said to have these amazing powers. We rule the world or whatever. And and then on the other hand,
right, simultaneously
we're weak,
yeah, we're
pathetic.
simultaneously subhuman and superhuman.
Well, how? So that's what I'm saying. Jews are damned if they do and damned if they don't. And in fact, some Jews
And
did
so
march.
for that reason,
Jews marched.
for precisely that reason, if we're going to be damned either way, which we are, then we may as well be true to ourselves, right? And true to our people.
Yeah. One of the reasons
I know I'd rather go down. If I'm going to go down either way, I'd rather go down
fighting
as a proud Jew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, one of the reasons that I often just did not ever want to talk about Israel was because I do get very emotional. But it was also because having grown up in a where Jews were rare, where I was very aware of being a Jew, and I was taught to be very proud of it. But from day one, I was, fielding questions my whole childhood. Where are your horns? Why did you kill him? This kind of, and coming from my friends, right? I think Jews who grew up in like that, very aware of how small, how tiny a people we are, how much of a minority we are, and how there's all this insanity out there about who we are. I think my sense is non-Jews don't want to hear about us. They don't want to. They don't want this kind. They are sick and tired of Jews whining.
Yeah, well,
right? Complaining. Don't you think that? Yeah. Don't you think that?
Here is what I think. I think the dominant society puts minorities in all these, racist categories. And we've got the people that they consider a violent threat. And then we have this condescending label towards some minorities. You heard the phrase model minority. And the people stereotypically put in the model minority category are Jews and Asians. Asians and Jews, right. Yeah. So to further, the stereotypes, the racist stereotype of Asians is quiet, unassuming. They're not going to, they're good at math and they're incredibly hardworking, but they're not innovative. All these ridiculous things. They're not innovative. They're not creative, and they're not going to rise above middle management. And so, and the stereotype of Asian men is they're not really men. They're somehow these eunuchs. They're not a sexual threat. So in the very offensive stereotype about Asian women is that they're geishas. They're submissive. But these are submissive stereotypes. These are non-threatening stereotypes. So they're ridiculous and they're stereotypes, but they're of a non-threatening sort. Jews, on the other hand, as you've said, we're seen as simultaneously subhuman and superhuman. We're seen as having too much influence. We're seen as being too loud, too pushy, too obnoxious, speaking truth to power, empowering other minorities, as we did in the civil rights movement. We're enabling all this. It's Jews who are responsible for porn and for homosexuality and for
capitalism and communism. You know what? It's like we're the commies,
right,
and we're the capitalists.
Right.
We're both of those.
So we're seen as we're not seen as quiet and unthreatening, and we're going to blend in and we're not going to threaten anyone. We're seen as the very root of the threat and the embodiment of the threat. And our culturally we are loud, right? A lot of us. We are at the forefront of every social justice movement. We do identify with other minorities, and we do want to stand with other minorities all the time against power, because we've experienced that. So when you unpack the stereotypes that people have, you can see why Jews are in a different category, and we're uniquely positioned as a threat to order and decency and white supremacy.
But we're just made to order for anyone who needs a monster, a scapegoat.
Yes.
You couldn't.
And the society projects whatever their demon is at that cultural moment. That's what Jews are. That's why Jews are settler colonialists and imperialists, because that's the demon of the moment. You know, the Germans in Germany didn't wake up one day and say, you know what? I'm a terrible, bigoted person. I'm a murderous, racist person, and I'm going to kill my neighbors. No, they were convinced they were doing something good. They were convinced that they were on the side of righteousness, and that the Jews were a threat to everything decent. And that's how you convince yourselves. When you see people the very day of October 7th, or the day after, before Israel's even struck back, when you see people rationalizing and celebrating the murder of Jews, the brutal murder of little children, of the most peaceful peaceniks in all of Israel. When you see people celebrating those deaths and saying that was a righteous act, there's no step at all from that to shoving the Jews in the gas chamber yourself. And these were, lefties, the Democratic Socialists of America, and these were academics. You say to yourself, how could Germany, this educated, sophisticated society, how could these educated people like doctors and scientists fall for these lies? But now we're seeing this is happening at Harvard. We're seeing this is happening at Stanford. It's happening at the elite universities, and it's happening it's happening among the intelligentsia.
Yes.
And so now we see how it happens with our own eyes.
Yeah. As a kid, I always wondered, how could it happen? How could it happen? And now I see it. And you're right. It doesn't come from the bottom up as much as it comes from the people who call shots, Well, it's really equal opportunity hatred, right? Because there are poor people who hate us for their own reasons. There's poor disenfranchised people who hate us for their own reasons. There's Jew hatred infects every echelon. Right.
Lucky us.
Yeah. Hey, you, I haven't said this, but you spent some of your childhood in Pittsburgh, and I just wanted to note that. And you're a graduate of Taylor Alderdice High School, and you were
and my bat mitzvah was a tree of life.
A tree of life, yeah. Who would have thunk, maybe you, that after that massacre at Tree of Life, that anti-Semitism would actually explode? A bunch of Jews get killed, and you would think that would maybe make it really bad to terrorize Jews, and instead the opposite happened.
Yeah, people smell blood in the water.
Wow. Well, hey,
because look, it's really, I think of it less as exploding directly after the Tree of Life massacre. I see it more as having exploded after October 7th. Here's the most brutal, widespread massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and this was the switch that flipped everything into, I saw it coming for years and years and years, but then it was a tsunami, a sudden tsunami.
Well, the left and everybody would say it is because of Israel's brutal, counterattack.
But, we see that nobody's attacking. Those people aren't attacking Chinese Americans for what China's doing. These people aren't attacking Russian Americans for what Russia's doing. It's not because of Israel. People don't hate Jews because of Israel. People hate Israel because of Jews, because they hate Jews.
Yeah, that's right. Jew hate. Wow. Hey, tell us about it. One of the stories I learned from reading your Substack is about this Israeli company, SodaStream. I find it such a fascinating story. Could you tell it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I was touching on the reason that so many people who think they're doing a good thing for Palestinians, by participating in the BDS movement. And BDS stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. So if you've ever seen a contaminated sticker on Sabra hummus, this is the BDS movement has been there, and they've put contaminated stickers on Sabra hummus. So first of all, this is a very performative kind of boycott. If you wanted to really boycott the products from Israel, you'd have to boycott half the scientific and medical advances known to humankind. You'd have to give up your cell phone, first of all. I cannot overstate how much Israel has contributed and how much you would have to purge if you wanted to really boycott it. So they don't want to really boycott it. I think they just want to hurt their colleagues, right? So they want to marginalize Jews here. So they went after SodaStream, which is, it's just a random choice of SodaStream, which carbonates water, and you can add flavor. So you can create your own seltzer with SodaStream. And you can save a lot of, it's really an environmental thing, because if you're like me, you buy cans of soda, people buy bottles of soda, and here you can just make your own in a glass. And so it eliminates a lot of waste. So SodaStream had a plant in the West Bank, and it was a model of cooperation and harmony. It employed Palestinians and Jews equally. It paid them equally. Palestinians who were working for SodaStream were making around 3 times as much as they could make anywhere in, like people with a spouse who was working for the Palestinian Authority was out earning their spouse by a factor of 3 because they just paid well. So the Palestinians who were employed by SodaStream were very happy. They reported high job satisfaction, good quality of life. They were able to give their kids opportunities. So BDS decides they're going to boycott SodaStream because it's an Israeli company in the West Bank, and they consider that an occupied territory. So they try to get people to stop buying from SodaStream until it moves its factory out of the West Bank, and they succeeded. So this one branch shut down, and all these Palestinians lost their livelihood. Now, it didn't hurt SodaStream because SodaStream went on. They have 13 other locations. They just moved the plant, and they sold it to Pepsi for $3 billion. So they didn't hurt SodaStream in the least. What they did was hurt a lot of Palestinians, and they hurt the working relationship between Jews and Palestinians. So that's just one way that people who just want to scream and want to boycott something, it's like Free Palestine. People don't think 1 millimeter deep about what they're saying or doing, and they don't think about what happens next if they succeed. So what happens if Hamas wins and Israel goes away? Well, then the whole region, right, is an Islamic caliphate, because that's Hamas's explicit goal.
Oh my gosh! So you mean
a violent and repressive caliphate?
Yeah. So the people
these are people who hang gay people from cranes and throw them from rooftops and make women cover themselves from head to toe. Is that really what our So is that what our liberal friends want? I don't think so, but they're not thinking about that. They're just having fun. They are having fun.
They feel so righteous. They feel so righteous.
And they feel powerful. So another thing that I can bring up. So like I'm sure we both know Billy Porter, right? Because we're both Pittsburgh people, and Billy Porter is so famous now. Yeah. So Billy Porter wrote a play once, and a character said something in that play, and it struck me and stayed with me. So in this play, one of these elderly Black aunts says to another, they're very religious people, they're Baptists, and one of them says to another, don't be so pure that you're no good to anyone. It's something like that. This woman was very religious, and her friend admonished her, don't be so pure that you're no good to anyone. And so if you have a concrete goal, like universal health care, or upping the minimum wage or marriage equality, you can work on those goals. If your goal is to smash the patriarchy, to abolish capitalism in America, to burn it all down and start over, to defund the police, if you have this lofty utopian goal, you're not going to accomplish that goal. You're not going to get anywhere near it. You're not going to even make a dent toward it. And so what's left to you? Like if you're so pure that you're no good to anyone, you have some lofty goal that you can never realize. So you're impotent in all the ways that matter, and your power comes from bullying the person next to you. And they always go after other people on the left. Here is Trump trying to erase our democracy. They're not going after him. They're not thinking that if they don't vote for Biden because they're angry at him, women are going to die in back alley abortions and a Muslim ban is going to be reinstituted and all these horrific things are going to happen. No, they're thinking like one step ahead. They're doing what feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about their own purity and their own virtue rather than anything that's any good to anybody.
Oh, God. You know what? I happened to read Yeats the other day, William Butler, and The Second Coming. There's a line in The Second Coming that just sums up where we are. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity.
Intensity, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Yeats is a favorite of mine.
Whoa, is that not where we are? Incredible. You are.
Well,
I thank you for your work, Ellisa.
I don't lack conviction.
No, you do.
Thank you so much.
You do not. And again, you can. Ellisa's writing. She told me before this interview that I write because I'm not a talker. I'm not necessarily going to be as coherent talking. You've been more than coherent, but when she writes, she's amazing. You can get it by going to Substack. And then Ellisa, Elissa Wald, Wald, and her Substack is titled Never Alone. Oh, God.
Well,
Thank you
so much. And I'm sorry I have to cut out.
I know you do.
Sorry I have to cut out just a little ahead of the end of the hour. Yeah, I have a 10 o'clock meeting, but it has been such a pleasure to speak with you. And I hope some of your listening audience will join my community over at Never Alone at Substack.
I hope so too, because the more the merrier, the more the stronger. Thank you.
Yeah.
Really, thank you so
Lynn.
much,
Talk
Ellisa.
to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, yeah, God almighty. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. There were so many places we didn't get to go with her. I could talk to her for 5,000 hours, and I so appreciate her helping me find words sometimes, and to feel like I am not alone, because I do feel like my head is exploding. The ground under me is not solid. It's a frightening thing. So, I note that Joseph Lieberman died, a guy I couldn't stand. I don't think he was a bad man. I just could not stand the guy. I couldn't even stand his voice, the way his voice. I can't even hear it in my head now, thank God. But it was sort of, I don't know. It drove me nuts. And he was his own guy. I mean, I'll give him credit for having the ability to do what he wanted. He was not into being part of, having the group like him. And that does suggest a certain kind of courage, I guess. But man, what he did. And he was the first Jew, speaking of Jews, he was the first Jew to be on a major party's ticket in a national election. He was obviously Al Gore's running mate. And in fact, later on, John McCain really wanted him as his running mate. So he could have, been on the losing end as a Democratic vice president and as a Republican vice president. He became very religious later in life. It helped cause the breakup of his first marriage. And his religiosity put me off. I was already at that point squawking a lot about all the Christian, all the Christian politicians and government officials needing to put their Christianity in everybody's face. And it drove me nuts. And then here comes Lieberman, and he's doing the same, constantly talking about him, talking about his religion. And I read in one of the obituaries that he was always quoting from the Hebrew Bible and giving thanks to God. And this shows why Jews are just damned if they do and damned if they don't, and always sort of scared. The Anti-Defamation League, the people who look out for anti-Semitism, the Anti-Defamation League got in touch with Lieberman and said, please, could you tone it down, all the Jewish stuff? Could you tone it down? Because their fear, which was based in reality, was that it would put people off. It would alienate people. It alienated me, but I don't think they were exactly thinking about that. So, yeah, he turned. Well, you know what? I'll give him this. You couldn't put him in a box. He, even when he became an independent, not a Democrat, he caucused with the Democrats. He voted almost always with the Democrats, but not always. I guess maybe things were better when people were able to be true to themselves and not the mob, not the crowd, not for fear of being, canceled. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Hey, I saw something that made me feel I'm excited because I so love this actor. I didn't love Oppenheimer, the movie, which is why, of course, it won every award known to man. But I did love the actor who played him, and I loved him. I fell in love with him from watching the series, the British series Peaky Blinders. And if you've never watched that, oh man. Anyway, there he was. I just fell in love with him. So it turns out, and I don't know if you saw this, that he's signed on. Cillian, I guess is how it's pronounced, right? Cillian Murphy, the guy who played actor who played Oppenheimer. He's signed on with Universal Pictures to produce and star in a movie called Blood Runs Cold, the Yablonsky murders and the battle for the United Mine Workers of America. So I guess that means he's going to be what? He's going to be playing Yablonsky? And whatever. It's an extraordinary story that is obviously very much a story set in these here environs. And I'm hoping that means he'll come to town and I could maybe even see him on occasion. But I don't suppose it will mean that. A few things before we get the show done here. I've been wanting to point out, and I'm sure you already know, but my God, did you see who the highest paid city employee is? Did you see that? It's mind blowing. It's sort of like when you found out that the highest paid person at almost every university is not the president, is not some major professor. It's always like the football coach or the basketball coach, just showing, whatever. I don't know. But so it turns out the highest paid, the person who made the most taxpayer dollars working for the city last year was a paramedic, a first responder. His name is Anthony DeSantis, and he grossed more than $300,000. More power to him. I hope he enjoys it, but it suggests there's a problem. The problem being that there's apparently not enough people, and so some people, especially those willing to, are working a lot of overtime. So that's how you get to a number like that, a lot of overtime. And so there's a police officer who's a patrol officer, and he made almost $300,000, and that would be for the same reason, overtime. And he made more than the chief of police. And they're all making more than the mayor. 29 city employees earn more than Mayor Gainey. And I mean, I don't know. Look, I don't know, but I know that it means somehow that things aren't properly staffed, or that's nuts. Just saying. Struck me as that's just nuts. I don't want to talk about it. I'm talking to myself. I don't want to talk about it. Hey, did you see the that happiness survey? The happiest places continue to be, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, and Sweden. They got the 4 top rankings in the annual World Happiness Report. And we hit an all-time low. Americans came in at 23. And the thing is, what fed much of our drop is the unhappiness of young people. Americans, particularly those under the age of 30, they have become, truly drastically less happy. I can't imagine why. They have reason. I guess the world they were promised, or what they assumed, and then the pandemic took away so much from them if they were in school. Yeah. And Americans in general, we have never been in the top 10 for happiness. And I think that's part of our culture. Our founding documents suggest we're supposed to pursue it, that we have a right to the pursuit of happiness. And the only thing we seem to get out of that is just we can't get off the treadmill. And our culture is a tough culture. It works people hard and compensates them in a totally, inequitable way. The happiest young people in the world, for some reason, are in Lithuania. The unhappiest young people in the world are not here. They are, and understandably so, in Afghanistan. Can't imagine. So, all the folks who then pore over this kind of data are saying that obviously the pandemic had a lot to do with stuff, but the other biggie is something we talk about a lot: social media. it's just a poisonous thing for young people. And we all know that young people's rates of depression, anxiety, way, way up, particularly among girls. And I don't know, you throw in climate change and who knows what else. It's just really, and somebody here said this, and I don't know, I guess this makes sense. There's a lot of data that shows that the greater your expectations are, the less happy you are. So those who want and want and want and expect and expect and expect and feel like they're supposed to have things, the more you have that feeling in you, the more inclined you will be to be unhappy, because life just doesn't work that way for most people. So that would be a good, a good thing to take away is the happiest people are people who, they don't want a lot of stuff unnecessarily. And see, that's a very un-American kind of a way to be, because in America, we're all about wanting and feeding desires that we didn't even know we had. That's where the advertisers come in. Okay, so I think that's. I'm trying to see if there's. I think that's it. I just want to do this because my mom's heading into her 102nd birthday, and I see this. A 103-year-old Italian woman was arrested for driving a car with an expired license. Giuseppe Molinari said, "I will continue to drive. I will buy myself a Vespa," she said. And I guess nothing really happened to her. In fact, the local mayor said, I think she deserves a medal rather than a fine. My mother still insists she can drive, even though her license is expired. But if she does, she just drives a few blocks over to the drugstore. I hope she doesn't, but maybe. God, I hope not. So there's that. And I think, guys, I think that's it for me. I'm going to call it quits. And I'll talk at you again on Monday. And that's assuming the world's still spinning. And I know my head will still be spinning. And, we're all still here. Everything is so. Ugh. So, have a good one.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.